Welcome to The Antidote. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
All right, and we are coming at you here a little after 12 o'clock Central Time on Monday, March 30th, 19 days after what we have termed 3/11, the date of the World Health Organization publicly declaring COVID-19 coronavirus to be a global pandemic. So we're about to enter week 4 of this. And on our
So-called World Health Organization.
There you go. That's a good point. Yeah, we don't know if they actually represent the common good of the common health of the people of the globe, and I think there's a good argument to probably
That they
be
do not,
made
yes.
against that. Yes, indeed. So thank you for correcting. Thank you for setting the record on that. But we're about to enter week 4 of this what has been declared a global pandemic, and once again, as we've reiterated on previous shows, the entire world is in uncharted waters. We've never seen a massive global shutdown, certainly not on this level where the entire world all at once just kind of shuts down in a very unprecedented manner. We're entering into week 4 of this. And on our last few shows, we've tried to do, and I don't know, we haven't been perfect at this, just a lot of times just speaking off the cuff, just giving our feelings on what we see going on from week to week. But, we've tried to do a combination of trying to, I guess, make sense of what we know or what we think we know about what is going on, with the combination of ways to respond to this, to make sense of this for ourselves, and also try to make sense of this for loved ones, people we care about, who might not be as knowledgeable on certain matters as us and people in our audience and in some other alt media audiences are. So we're about to go into the 4th week of this. I guess maybe it's a good time to reflect, and maybe we could just say specifically, what do we know, or what do we think we know? I guess for me, what I know right now is that there is a virus. People are dying from this, and I also see in place a massive effort there's a major big time effort going on to blame a foreign power, that being China, for the spread of this. We know that, what you pointed out in our last show, that compared to September 11th, this is much more of an immediate threat to the general public, particularly because this is something that physically affects not just people who are in the proximity of the World Trade Center towers in New York City, but it affects each and every person, as far as possible serious health effects, which could lead to illness or even, in many cases, death. So, I mean, that's a major difference right there. That's something we know, is that this does potentially pose a threat to every single person, not just here in the U.S., but also on the planet. And the last thing I'll say that we know is that we know right now there's a major conversation going on between the forces of the people who think that we really need to treat this as seriously as we can, and we need to keep people apart from each other for as long as possible until we get some things figured out. Then you've also got a push to reopen businesses and get things going as soon as possible. And Donald Trump's been waffling on this for weeks. He's been, well, let's get the country reopened by Easter, but then he gets some pushback on that. I think now, Trump has kind of changed his tune so many times on things. I think Trump at this point is just very much seems to be a fish out of water. He just doesn't know what to do in this situation. I think this is exposing a very, should have been very obvious, but a very obvious, I think, unfitness, not being fit or qualified for an office like this. And you see that in this type of situation where the man's just completely out of his element. And last thing I'll say that I know, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is that there was just a major effort by our federal government in general, by both major parties in Congress, to push through essentially a bailout for big business. Looks like 2008 all over again, and while trying to get it through as quickly as possible and shutting down any serious conversation about it, as was evidenced with Representative Thomas Massey last week. And I'd like to go back and circle back around to that in a few minutes. But those are some of the things I know, or I think I know, is going on right now. What would you say, Jeremy? What are some of the things that you can say is going on, and that we think is going on, that we can see from like nearly 4 weeks of observing this?
Well, this is a difficult question, of course, because, like I pointed out last week, knowledge is a very to say you know something there's a gradation there, of course. How well do you know something? You expect the sun will rise, and knowing what that even means, or the dynamics of the actual astrophysics of that, the sun so-called rising and all of that has its own dimension, but just sort of counting on that tomorrow when you wake up, that it'll turn from night into day, and things will get lighter at some point. That's something that we would count on, but at some point that will very likely not be the case, right? If you go far enough out into the future. And so it can show that, like, even the things that we believe we can count on in terms of knowing can eventually in terms of a physical dimension, they will eventually be an unknown potentially. So that's just a conceptual framework for how, in the midst of that, we're still, living, breathing human beings that then have to make decisions on a day-to-day basis that's based on what we believe that we might know. So, for example, things like knowing that there is a virus. I haven't seen the virus. I haven't actually even seen really, like, the instruments. That's what's interesting in science, right? That, I've talked about how that science, in contrast to, don't you believe the science? There's no such thing as the science. Science is a process, a mode of understanding. It can also then be said to be a community of people who agree to a certain method of both experiment, which I've pointed out before is related to experience, right? So that every human being who has experience can pursue the scientific process as an experiment, meaning you can change one thing and then see how it might affect you. And you can't always say, right, you can't always say that that's the cause of something, but you can pursue the use of the experiment as a process to begin to build things that you believe to certain levels of confidence, right? Okay, so that's one thing. That another part of science, of course, is that we begin to use as humans methods of knowing, scopes, for example, or abilities to intuit or experience dimensions that maybe cannot be seen either by our five senses as humans. Like, we are fairly locally contained in terms of our immediate senses, our hearing, our vision, our smell, that touch, right? That all comes into focus in a hyper local fashion in many ways, especially when you think about the macrocosmos or the microorganisms, that area, the invisible. So these scopes, that's partially how we've come to understand that there are things that are so small that we can't see. There's such things as microscopes, right? But then there's also telescopes, the ability to see into far distances, right? So in the midst of all of that, those of us who that's not the route that we pursue, is using microscopes, whatever kind, electron microscopes or just basic microscopes or even telescopes. And, we then have still believe that we know that there is such things as what a star may be, or in this case, what a virus may be. But I don't really know. I've never really seen a virus in a way that I could say that I know that it exists. So that, to me, in a certain way, it's an important question. What is the nature of viruses? What is the nature of this virus? And then you get into questions of category. The coronavirus, right? This is the novel coronavirus. The so-called common cold is often a symptom, is a symptomology in human beings of a different coronavirus. SARS. This is this has been titled SARS-CoV-2, so that stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus number 2, so related to SARS-1, which had its big outbreak in Asia in, I believe, in early 2000s, 2002, in that area. So, and that's what we are seeing in terms of the symptomology. And so I guess that's where I come down on is, what do I know about what I've read and seen and heard about what looks to be an emergent symptomology related to this virus that's been titled SARS-CoV-2.
SARS was identified in 2003, and it was said to first known cases of infecting humans was said to happen in southern China in 2002. So 2003 is when it was identified.
And so, so these questions, thank you for getting those facts, Greg. And so there is this issue of how do we sort all of this out while also being pragmatic. And so then I have a tendency to then sort of sort knowledge practically. And I know it's not necessary. You can get into trouble doing that because you then have a tendency to maybe err on the side of sort of putting things off in terms of your epistemological approach or trying to figure out what's true or not because you don't see them as immediately relevant or useful to your situation. So I can see there's a danger there. But I do think that there's a strong balance in a pragmatic approach, a pragmatic epistemology, where it's academic in the best, it's academic and scientific in the best mode of thinking about those classifications of doing knowledge work, meaning it's not ivory tower. You're not trying to be an academic just because it's, of interest to a few people or that it's going to keep you your tenured position, but you are approaching things in a way where you are looking into patterns of human information and knowledge systems where you think there's something of importance or of meaning or of reason for humans to pursue that angle of information. And so that also includes in science, because science can in many ways be, a lot of astrophysics, whether sort of more mainstream or even sort of alternative approaches to astrophysics can be sort of seen in many ways as not having immediate pragmatic reason, but then you can very quickly see that down the road there's such things as understanding potentially 0-point energy or understanding what lies behind what looks like invisible space, and in ways that could have radically or even revolutionary impact on everyday human activity in our lives. If you talk about like energy becoming intensely distributed or something like that. So I guess I'm just sort of giving a run through what goes on in my mind when I begin to approach what it is that I think that I may know about something such as what's been declared the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 global pandemic on 3/11/20 by the so-called WHO. So I just want to show like one example of how that leads me to then begin to investigate and think and talk and propose what might be wise to do. So, for example, masks. The so-called World Health Organization has seemingly teamed up with the worst of our own so-called public health experts in this country to basically gaslight us around the usage of masks. Okay, just very recently, in the recent days, the WHO has come out again and said that people should not wear masks unless they are feeling unwell, are symptomatic, potentially are immunocompromised, or are treating our healthcare workers. But meanwhile, that's obviously a gaslighting of the people, because it turns out there's multiple studies, and there have been for weeks and weeks, if not months now, that people who are asymptomatic in this case, meaning like you're not necessarily coughing or you don't have a fever, but your body is dealing with the virus and you're shedding the virus to a substantial amount without you even knowing. So I would say that, like, for example, so that to me is a pragmatic approach. And I'll include a link to an interesting Twitter thread that shows the approach that the people in the Czech Republic took to all of this, where even their government, of course, was like, falling down on the job like ours is, or worse. And so the people themselves in the Czech Republic decided that it was sort of like a cultural thing, and there was cultural leadership in saying we should wear masks, even if just for the sake of other people, because that's the other side of it. It's the way that we were gaslit in this country was, and I already described this, so I'll just reiterate it, that because of the failure of the so-called most powerful, empire in history, the most powerful military in history, to have basically outsourced or not been prepared enough to actually produce basic items, industrial items like masks. It's not complex. It's not rocket. It's not like Tesla producing rockets and stuff like that, right? This is masks. And so because we did not have enough masks, we had cultural icons and so-called public health officials basically trying to scare the public from using masks because they wanted, which was just to preserve them for the people who would be more immediately working with people who were coughing. And then there's the other question of aerosol generation in terms of like healthcare workers who are intubating people, which actually creates environments where there's an aerosolized environment of viral loads. And it does look like that the question of how much viral load you encounter is a strong factor in how well your body can fight it off. And so this is why I think we need to begin to think about this if we're dealing with this question of a virus, of how much of a virus, what kind of a virus, what can we do? Let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so we were gaslit in the United States of America because our so-called leadership had failed, and not just in the moment, but over decades in terms of an economic globalization approach that left real basic critical infrastructure outsourced around the world. We were being gaslit by our own people, saying that we should not wear masks, when that probably would have been the wisest, least interrupting, least disruptive thing that we could have done. It probably should have been suggested in late January, early February, and it wouldn't have to be a law. It wouldn't have to be demanded. It wouldn't have to be legal. It could have just become a cultural thing, and that's what the people in the Czech Republic did. They didn't have enough masks. They basically just said we should wear masks. We're going to make masks. And people will say, well, N95 masks, or you need N95 masks or better, or you need full-on respirators to be fully defended. And sure, I mean, the thing about this, like if it can stick on surfaces, if you're trying to fully avoid coming in contact with it, I feel like you've already lost the psychological approach. What you're actually trying to do is reduce the interface with the virus. And what we're also trying to do is reduce the interface of the virus with surfaces, especially public surfaces, and especially with people who maybe need to go shopping, who are elders or who are immunocompromised. They need to go shopping, and so we need to, and so some grocery stores have created times for them to do it. But the best thing is if we, the people, in the United States of America and around the world, would take on the mask as almost as a cultural symbol in many ways. And it is an interesting way to do it. Think about, because even what's the worst case scenario? You look weird. But think about also, there's a question of biometrics in all of this. People are beginning to think about what is the facial recognition implications of all of this. New York City, for example, has anti-mask laws. The Chinese have been working on to figure out how they can identify facial recognition behind masks. So that's an interesting question of wearing masks in public. So we don't want to let them destroy the public space. And the approach that we've allowed to happen is the shutting down of everything, when we could have done a much more effective approach to mitigation by just taking on, as we the people, not throwing our hands up in the air. Oh, we don't have enough masks. We can't buy masks. I can't get masks delivered on Amazon. And just dig into it and be like, oh, what happened in 1918? People wrapped cloths around their faces. They made more effective homemade masks. So I think that that's one approach that I think we should take on. Make it political. If you are, Palestinian solidarity activists should take on keffiyehs, and people who are libertarian activists could take on writing messages on plain paper masks. And then I have, I've done some research about how you can soup up your own produced masks with things like salt. Is one thing where you actually sort of like can gently boil even just a basic sort of cloth or surgical mask or something in some salt water. You lightly boil it, just the outside of it, and you basically create a salt crystalline lattice on the outside that will make it at the very least, a less hospitable environment for the virus to exist on and or move through. And it's not necessarily because the salt itself is antiviral, but it's a lot because of the shape of the crystalline lattice. So there's these kinds of things. There's also, you can dip if a little more advanced DIY approach would be to then dip cloth, and or you can find the charts of what kind of materials are most effective, such as HVAC vacuum cleaner filters. That's very high up there. That's closing in on effectiveness around N95. So if you figure out how to work that into a mask, that might be really interesting. And then another level is you can acquire material like copper and zinc. That copper and zinc sulfates that are basic, chemicals that are available. They're like agricultural materials, they're, laboratory materials, and they're both heavily antiviral. And so you can create solutions and dip masks in there, and you can make layers of this, and then you get some goggles, and so what's the harm of that? Maybe if this whole thing is a quote unquote hoax, we're being played, but especially if you just sort of like, do it with self-awareness. And again, you err on the side of not, exposing yourself and your loved ones to a dangerous situation. So what's the harm in approaching that, other than, people feeling uncomfortable? A certain sort of social cowardice, I think, that it maybe is most intense in places like the United States, where like the one thing that you don't want to be is the guy or the gal who looks different than everybody, And there's even we have even sort of counter, that's where the counterculture comes from in a certain ways, by being a reactionary against the mainstream culture, but then that becomes a thing to fit into too.
You're making a great point here, Jeremy, and that's one thing that I appreciate about you bringing to the table, is that while we don't know the truth, we know that this is something that can help us, and we know that this is a precaution that we can take, so that even if we don't know for sure, or have doubts like some people do about the seriousness of just how serious this might be on a mass scale, at least here domestically in America, where we're doing our show from. I mean, this is a practical precaution that can be taken. And I will say, and I think I talked about this before in our last show, is that the fear of being different, of sticking out in America, and and it was a combination of this and also the fact that we'd never seen anything before like this. When a mutual acquaintance of ours reached out and talked to us at the beginning of February about the need to get masks, I completely dismissed it. One, because I didn't think anything, I didn't see something like this to this magnitude coming here. And two, because I thought the idea was absurd of wearing a mask in public.
Right. And so then that's the question of normalcy bias, right? And normalcy bias works on a lot of fronts. There's social normalcy bias, right? Where we definitely have, inertia towards sticking out. And that's completely understandable from a human perspective in terms of how tribal our origins are. And then there's the normalcy bias in terms of things can't change as much as we think they can. Things will sort of be the same as they have been, and so. All right, so there's that. There's the question of masks. I will link to the Twitter thread of the way that the Czech Republic approached it, and they were able to really moderate the spread of the virus in a highly effective fashion. And it wasn't the only approach, but they're not under total lockdown. And so what you see is that there's a whole variety of approaches between doing nothing and discouraging people from wearing just even a rag around their face, let alone N95 mask or respirator mask, and respirators, such as like paint, like what people would wear for paint, that will very likely be the most effective in terms of being out and about in maybe, in heavily public ways. But at the same time, this is why I've been sticking to, not everyone is going to be able to get their hands on respirators or even N95 masks. And we don't want the perfect be the enemy of the good. And also we don't want our psychological approach to this to be unreasonable or perfectionistic in a way that can actually just maybe create too much stress and will not actually work out if you're trying to actually maybe say, like, I don't want to ever come in contact with it. And I would remind people that there still is a question of how long this has been around, and maybe it is and was much more pervasive than we know, and that it was already moving around this country, or some form of it was back end of last year. So we don't know exactly, but again, I would say let's err on the side of caution from what we've seen and reported on the dynamics of bad cases of this. And this does seem to affect certain people, young people, like people in their 20s and 30s even, because it said it's most heavily weighs on elders, and it looks like that is the case. But that it also is the case that people who get it at any age, some groups of people, even those who seem to be really healthy in the 20, who are 20 and 30 and are active and all of that, can have a intense, a tense experience with it, and especially like understanding the potential for this to be a bioweapon, which is something, again, who the real scientists aren't by those making proclamations of basically sort of hypothetical assertions that this couldn't be a bioweapon because this is not the kind of bioweapon that I would design if I were a scientist. That is not scientific explanation of why this is not a bioweapon. But let's say this were a bioweapon, then part of what it would be designed to do potentially is not just kill a lot of people, but would be to debilitate let's say military-aged males, if we were thinking in an old-school fashion. And what we've seen is that part of what the debilitation that happens from this, let's say it's not fatal, and there's lots of questions about fatality rate, and people want to argue it's all the way down to a flu type of scenario where we're talking on the realm of 0.1% down to maybe 0.01%, and that it's just a flu, bro. Or it's, in the realm of 1% heading in towards sort of old school SARS terms, up to 10% or more in worst case scenarios. But even in those non-fatal cases where people need to get put on ventilators and are, have the ARDS, the acute respiratory distress syndrome, that is seems to be endemic symptomology of this, that people then have. It's sort of like having a lung attack rather than a heart attack, where a heart attack can leave you with a certain amount of reduced heart capacity for the rest of your life, depending on how bad it was, how well you healed, how you responded to it. So this is similar to that, but in a lung fashion, where the lungs can then be impacted for the rest of your life. That's not the type of thing that we want to just sort of err on the side of, oh, whatever, bro, whatever happens, bro. No, especially, let's say, if you take the responsibility of being a military-age male, in terms of, let's sort of even take that beyond the military, but in terms of the masculine responsibility, a major responsibility there is not to be sort of just gung-ho and exposing yourself and others to something that could be debilitating. Okay? So first, do no harm, right? That's one of the best parts of the medical tradition, the Hippocratic Oath, right?
Yes, excellent, Jeremy. I think that I'm glad that you're really promoting the seriousness of this, because I think you've really gotten into, as I said before, a very practical solution that a lot of people just, the experts completely dismissed. And, honestly, if we could have gotten over the social stigmatization of this, I mean, that may have calmed down a lot of the hysteria regarding this. But, a combination of professed medical, quote unquote, professionals saying don't do this, and what I had talked about before with the factors of the idea. I was in like this social box where I thought, well, it'd be absurd for me to do this. That's a way of fearing like the judgment of people who would see me doing something like that, combined with just being told that there was no need for it, and also believing that something like that would never come here. But you've also touched for a long-term effect and something like this. Even if you don't per se come down with coronavirus or COVID-19, if you don't officially are diagnosed with it, well, what are the long-term effects of this? What's the long-term effects of breathing in the air during this period of time? And that's another point that I think you've latched upon that's really important here. And I'm glad you're really making a focus of this issue. And as I said in the beginning of February, while I'm still not sure about the practicalities of wearing a mask, I kind of wish, with the benefit of hindsight, I'd maybe listened more instead of dismissing it. So.
Well, and there's no time like now, and so we'll continue to figure that out both privately and publicly in terms of what we intend to do, what we will do, what we propose to be done in a wider fashion, and so yes, so we'll and I shared some links for last show, I believe, that included things about approaches to masks, and I will look to include a few more links on that, including this Twitter thread that I talked about. So practical approaches, and so even for folks who have like children at home now from school, like we do, like my son and I, we worked on the mask together to make a salt layer. And it was a practical approach to chemistry lab or science class, or so there's possibilities here that like even say it wasn't a question of how to protect oneself or one's family in an existential fashion. There's learning capacity here about taking responsibility for knowledge, for practical knowledge, and the connection between scientific understanding and then engineering, you might say, right? And so there's all kinds of gradations of that. So there's that. And then secondly, Greg, and if you want to add something, go for it before I start this next section. But I'd like to then get into another obviously practical approach here, which has to do with the human immune system, human health, vitamins, minerals, the question of the relationship to the sun. And of course, this is another area where between Trump saying, this someday this is just going to disappear someday in the sun in the spring, and, no sort of question about how that's working. It doesn't seem to be actually working like that in hot climates where it does have some spread still. But there is something to that. And the so-called public health experts on the other side, almost none of them are saying that publicly on television. They could be telling us about why that is, and that really a lot of times it's not just that sunlight is deadly to viruses, but
it almost sounds to me like almost sounds to me like there's a real, shockingly, I'm real shocked by the sarcasm, that a lot of this medical professionals might be driven by partisanship in the same way that the Trump people are. Imagine that.
And even worse than partisanship, maybe even, they're driven by a sort of a technocratic elitism of actually power and control. Good point where they want to control the policy,
which ultimately stretches to bipartisan lines in a very big way. But you're right about that.
Yes, but it then does play into that too, and it's because then the other thing that's not being stated is that one of probably the key reasons why these kinds of viruses impacts on human health seem to go down as you go into the spring and towards the summer is because of the question of sunlight and vitamin D in relationship to the human immune system. Okay, so that's where I then want to get into this question of why things like zinc, which is, maybe we'll touch on this question of the hydroxychloroquine that's been sort of being touted and was sort of being pushed by Trump for a while.
Yes,
and it looks like there is some serious practical backing to that question, but the main thing is that hydroxychloroquine acts as what's called an ionophore, meaning a channel. It acts as a channel into the cellular matrix for zinc, which I remind you, I just said, like, you can use zinc on the outside of your body as a antiviral, but also zinc can work on the inside of the body. And my wife tells me that there's a deep connection between vitamin A and zinc on the inside of the body, and zinc can work in the intracellular regions to basically stop and destroy the RNA replication capacity of viruses, including this novel coronavirus, it looks like.
Yeah, we might want to circle back around to the hydroxychloroquine before we wrap up here. I'll just make one quick comment with regards to what you're talking about with sunlight. Now, I haven't been able to every day because there have been days when I haven't had a chance to, but lately one of the things I could try to do now that the weather is becoming nicer here is try to get my dog out for at least one, on some days, 30-minute walks a day. So, I mean, that would just be a way for me to be able to get out for a little bit of time and get what you were talking about there. And I know it's not like, I mean, I'm not going to toot my own horn and talk about, but that's something that I have, decided to try to make a point of doing now, as long as the weather stays nice. So there's a lot of sunlight right now where we're at in our area. So.
That's great, Greg. I mean, and also that, that you have that as a practice in walking the dog. And because it's interesting too, as we'll get into with vitamin C, that in relationship to animals, actually, it looks like dogs actually, humans are one of a few animals that don't actually are not able to produce vitamin C endogenously inside of the human body, but that dogs, for example, seem to be able to do that in relationship to their coat. Very likely, I would imagine, in relationship to their environment, and probably in relationship to sunlight and the atmosphere. So you're doing both yourself a service and your dog a service, I think, Greg, and by keeping those walks going.
Thank you. So, I guess let's get into this. Talk a little bit more about what this situation here with vitamin C and zinc and minerals and vitamins. Okay, I'll let you take the floor on where you want to go with this.
Okay, thank you, Greg, and feel free to interrupt whenever. I'm going to be reading from a book called Nourishing Traditions, the cookbook that challenges politically correct nutrition and the diet dictocrats by Sally Fallon with Mary Enig, PhD. And, so this has its own bias, and it's definitely biased towards ancestral diets and definitely, towards some animal, a substantial amount of animal foods. And so, so it's biased against vegans and vegetarians to some extent. However, the information in terms of the basics of the minerals and the vitamins, I think, is key no matter what. All right, so page 36 in the introduction under vitamins. Quote, the discovery of the first vitamins in the early 1900s began the era of modern interests in diet and nutrition. Pioneering chemists found that certain, quote, unknown substances, unquote, in food were essential to life. They discovered that fat-soluble vitamin D and water-soluble B vitamins were necessary to prevent diseases like rickets, beriberi, and pellagra, and that vitamin C, a factor present in many fresh foods, prevented scurvy. By the 1930s, scientists had discovered many more vitamins and had cataloged their effects. Public interest in the subject was intense, and articles on vitamins often appeared in magazines and newspapers. The study of vitamins has not waned since the early days of research, and the subject of food science has proved to be far more complex than scientists at first imagined. The early discoveries led some researchers to conclude that all vitamins necessary to life could be supplied in their isolated factory-produced form as vitamin pills. We now know that vitamins do not exist as single components, but as parts of a complex of compounds, each part contributing to the whole. For example, vitamin C used to treat scurvy and other deficiency conditions is more effective when given as a natural food concentrate, which includes minerals, rutin, and other analogs. As many as 17 water-soluble vitamins labeled B have been discovered, present in different proportions in different foods, but all working together synergistically. Vitamin D may have as many as 12 components, of which several are active. Vitamin P has at least 5 components. Most vitamins produce optimum results in the presence of certain naturally occurring, quote, cofactors, unquote. Okay, so just an aside here, that sort of comorbidities that are brought in relationship to who is the COVID-19 is more deadly towards. There's also cofactors in relationship to health generating qualities. And just one thing I do want to say is that, we don't have quite enough information yet about the targeting of the most severe symptoms and why certain people basically don't even not even know that they quote unquote had the virus, and why other people have lifetime lung scarring and or die potentially. But it does look, there is obviously some genetic aspect, and although this doesn't look to be like quote unquote an ethno-specific bioweapon, there are genetic aspects to this, obviously. And there's, for example, it looked like a study came out that people with blood type O were much less at risk of serious negative reaction to the virus. Then there's also questions about the ACE2 receptors that are sort of predominant in relationship to the lungs. And then other aspects that it maybe have a genetic in combination with epigenetic, i.e. the way that genes express themselves in relationship to the health of our actions, our diet, our activity, and our environment ultimately. So that's a whole nother thing that we don't quite know enough about to really speak in a well-educated way. But I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so naturally occurring cofactors such as trace minerals, enzymes, and coenzymes, as well as other vitamins. The bewildering array of factors in foods now known to be essential has led well-informed nutritionists to recognize the futility of providing all factors necessary to life in pill form. While supplementing the diet with certain isolated vitamins has proven temporarily beneficial for many disease conditions, the best source of vitamins for most of us in the long term is properly prepared whole foods. For this reason, the importance of eating nutrient-dense meals, rich in vitamins and their cofactors, cannot be underestimated. Vitamin and mineral content of food varies enormously with farming methods. Nitrogen fertilizers produce initial high yields, in part by pulling minerals from the soil. In time, commercially fertilized soils become depleted, and the foods grown on them suffer accordingly. Overall, vitamin and mineral content of American fruits and vegetables has declined significantly during the last 50 years. The revival of interest in composts and natural fertilizers rich in minerals, including trace minerals, is due in part to the realization that healthy soil is the basis of health for all life forms. an aside here, human humus, I like to point that out, is that there's a commonality there in relationship to the best soil having a high humus content, from ashes to ashes, dust to dust, soil, human, with a spark of spirit and God in there. Okay, so, and maybe that spark of spirit and God is highly pervasive. So, all right. So that's just me preaching. All right. Some people say go back to your mega churches on Easter Sunday to show that you're a good American Christian. I would say, let's look deep into God's wisdom. Okay.
Yeah, I would say that's a lot more. Personally, for me, I'd say that's a lot. I'd say that would be much more worthwhile use of your time than going and lining up the pockets of these already extremely wealthy, Christian, quote unquote, Zionist televangelists who are surrounding Trump. So anyway.
Okay, so for example, cabbage can vary in its iron content from 94 parts per million to 0 parts per million. Tomatoes can vary in iron content from 1,938 parts per million to 1 part per million. Vitamin A content of butterfat varies with the season as well as the soil. Even the protein portion of grains and legumes will vary with soil fertility. Some commercially raised oranges have been found to contain no vitamin C. Food processing affects vitamin content to varying extents. Some vitamins are heat sensitive, while others survive heating fairly well. Steaming and waterless methods of cooking preserve vitamins better than rapid boiling, and vegetables cooked in an acidic liquid preserve vitamins better than those cooked in an alkaline medium. Oxidation is a prime cause of vitamin loss. Long periods of high heat used in canning are destructive to some vitamins, but not all. On the other hand, cold temperatures and freezing have little effect on vitamin content, and air or sun drying preserves or even enhances nutrient content. An aside here is that frozen vegetables can probably be some of the best vegetables that you can get your hands on, unless you grow your own nutrient-dense vegetables and you can eat them straight out of the garden. So that's just one thing to think about, too, in planning, because the third thing that I would propose that we think about pragmatically that will have intensely political parameters to it is the question of food and economics. And food is sort of a core of economics in certain ways. And just thinking about, Henry Kissinger, food is a weapon, NSM 200. I may even go ahead and release a video that I've had about when I confronted Ted Turner over 10 years ago. I think I've mentioned it before, and so maybe this week I'll put it up. And it refers to in the video, I believe, NSM 200 and Kissinger, in referencing the use of food as a weapon. And we know that is the case, of course, especially in relationship to the question of medical martial law. And we're not going to be able to this week deal with all of the questions of the techno-gulagical aspect of this, but I just recently did an interview with Richard Silverstein about some recent articles that he's written that both have to do with Netanyahu's coup using coronavirus to basically lock down Israel and expand the intensely invasive surveillance powers of Shin Bet, for example. But then also the technology question here. And we talked a little bit about the export of the Israeli high-tech surveillance technology in relationship potentially to this coronavirus question. So those are other issues that we are going to have to deal with in a very practical fashion moving forward. But as a core, we need to think about food. And there may be much even bigger, just like there's deeper economic issues that this 3/11 global pandemic has sort of like pricked the bubble on, or created a wave of consequences of some sort. There's something deeper there with the economics, obviously, with the dollar, with Wall Street, but there's also something deeper there in relationship to food and food production. So I'm just putting that on the table, that's the third part of what I propose that we think about as an epistemologically practical approach to our situation.
Yes, thank you for that. And I would say regarding that topic, and I think this is something I mentioned in our first show, we were talking about how, the practicalities of taking better health risks, as far as we were even talking about like the economics of, I think we talked a little bit about the economics of I forget of like the possible risks of people not being able to get the foods they need and things like that. But we had even alluded to there being a long-term conversation regarding like the actual merits of what we know as the science of food, as far as like this is something I by far am not and am nowhere close to an expert on, and in considering my personal situation and what I eat and drink, I'm in no room to like to lecture anyone about this. But we've got people like you and also John Brisson, who's going to be, I think I'm actually going to be talking with him for our channel later today, who know a lot about this stuff. So I'm happy to have people like you. But we were talking about having, this is the kind of stuff that there needs to be a long-term conversation, not just about whether or not people, financially feasible, people who are in lower income situations can afford to, feed and take care of their families, which of course is extremely important, but also longer term conversations over the merits of things like the foods, types of foods we eat, and the types of there needs to be a long, serious conversation regarding that stuff. So maybe something like this, and one of the things that could come out of this could be a conversation about things that have been people within like the alternative media have taken very seriously, but for whatever reason, I think there's a big part of this is a stigmatization that is in large part created by the nature of so much of what we know as alternative media, the kind of people who are really into these topics. Maybe this could be a little bit of a stigma-shattering moment for those types of conversations if we can expand and broaden the horizons of things that are already being discussed now on this matter.
Completely agree. I'm very interested to hear your conversation, too, with John Brisson, too, which would be very interesting because he's an expert on gut health, which is the key to a lot of this, really. So I'm just going to skip forward and just read through a few of these sections on the specific vitamins that look to be key. Especially at this moment. Okay, vitamin A. This all-important vitamin is a catalyst on which innumerable biochemical processes depend. According to Dr. Price, neither protein, minerals, nor water-soluble vitamins can be utilized by the body without vitamin A from animal sources. Vitamin A also acts as an antioxidant, protecting the body against pollutants and free radicals, hence against cancer. Vitamin A stimulates the secretion of gastric juices needed for protein digestion, plays a vital role in building strong bones and rich blood, contributes to the production of RNA, and is needed for the formation of visual purple. Sources of preformed vitamin A called retinol include butterfat, egg yolks, liver and other organ meats, seafood, and fish liver oils. Provitamin A, or carotene, is also a powerful antioxidant. It is found in all yellow, red, orange, or dark green fruits and vegetables. Carotenes are converted to vitamin A in the upper intestine. Vegetarians claim that the body's requirements for vitamin A can be met with carotenes from vegetable sources, but many people, particularly infants, children, diabetics, and individuals with poor thyroid function, cannot make this conversion. Furthermore, studies have shown that our bodies cannot convert carotenes into vitamin A without the presence of fat in the diet. Dr. Price discovered that the diets of healthy isolated peoples contained at least 10 times more vitamin A from animal sources than found in the American diet of his day. The high vitamin A content of their diets ensured their excellent bone structure, wide, handsome faces with plenty of room for the teeth, and ample protection against stress of all types. It is best to obtain vitamin A from natural sources like yellow butter, egg yolks, organ meats, fish, shellfish, and cod liver oil, as high amounts of synthetic vitamin A from supplements can be toxic, especially to those with impaired liver function and to those whose diets are otherwise poor. High levels of natural vitamin A have no toxic effects, in spite of the medical establishment's dire warnings to the contrary. Antibiotics, laxatives, fat substitutes, and cholesterol-lowering drugs interfere with vitamin A absorption. All right, I'm going to skip vitamin B complex for now, although it's important. Vitamin C, a water-soluble vitamin best known for its use in treatment of the common cold. It is also, i.e. coronavirus, it is also needed for a host of processes, including tissue growth and repair, strength of capillary walls, lactation, and adrenal gland function. It is vital for the formation of collagen, the body's structural substance, and i.e. an aside here is a really good combo, it looks like, is bone broths or collagen stews, which are very cheap. Like getting bones, you can get bones for very cheap. Plus, they're going to be, thrown away to some extent for even those who are doing a no harm approach to diet. And then combine that intake with making a bone broth. You use salt and vinegar, and then just cook it in a pot for some hours overnight, or a slow cooker, and combine that with vitamin C, and you have a really, really good combo there. Okay. All right. So back to vitamin C here. It is vital for the formation of collagen, the body's structural substance. It promotes healing of wounds and is a powerful antioxidant. Dr. Linus Pauling and others have promoted megadoses of vitamin C for cancer, while others have used large doses to treat schizophrenia and drug addiction. But megadoses of isolated ascorbic acid may lead to imbalances and deficiencies in vitamin P. New evidence suggests that vitamin C works synergistically with vitamin E. Hypoglycemics and individuals on a high-protein diet require more vitamin C, as these conditions interfere with the metabolism of ascorbic acid. It is found in many fruits and vegetables and in certain animal organs. Vitamin C is destroyed by heat. Alcohol and many common drugs, including aspirin and oral contraceptives, may reduce vitamin C levels in the body. Vitamin D. Like vitamin A, vitamin D is needed for calcium and phosphorus absorption, and thus is essential for strong bones, healthy teeth, and normal growth. It seems to protect against cancer and multiple sclerosis. Deficiency can cause rickets and myopia. The body manufactures vitamin D3 out of cholesterol in the presence of sunlight. Although some claim that we can obtain all the vitamin D we need by spending a short amount of time each day in the sun, Price found that healthy primitive diets were rich in vitamin D, containing foods like butterfat, eggs, liver, organ meats, marine oils, and seafood, particularly shrimp and crab. Synthetic D2 has been linked to hyperactivity, coronary heart disease, and other allergic reactions, and is poorly utilized compared to D3. New research indicates that optimal intake should be 10 times higher than the U.S. recommended daily allowance, thus confirming the findings of Dr. Price. Okay, vitamin E, I'm going to skip through it real quickly, but it's needed for circulation, tissue repair, and healing. And this powerful antioxidant works in concert with certain trace elements, notably selenium and zinc, to prevent cancer and cardiovascular disease, found in unrefined vegetable oils, butter, organ meats, grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, and dark green leafy vegetables. And now I'm going to skip forward finally in our last minute here to zinc. Because I think that there's a key aspect of the interface there. Okay, there's zinc. Called the intelligence mineral, zinc is required for mental development, for healthy reproductive organs, particularly the prostate gland, for protein synthesis and collagen formation. Zinc is also involved in the blood sugar control mechanism and thus protects against diabetes. Zinc is needed to maintain proper levels of vitamin E in the blood. Inability to taste or smell and loss of appetites are signs of zinc deficiency. This is what people are describing as symptoms of COVID-19. Okay, so obviously I think zinc is a key piece of that. It may even attack zinc or require additional zinc. Finally, zinc, high levels of phytic acid in cereal grains and legumes block zinc absorption. Zinc deficiency during pregnancy can cause birth defects. As oral contraceptives diminish zinc levels, it is important for women to wait at least 6 months after discontinuing the pill before becoming pregnant. Best sources include red meat, oysters, fish, nuts, seeds, and ginger. And so until next week, and we continue this conversation, Greg, thank you so much. Antidote, we out.
Until next time.
Get your grams up.